Already almost 5 years old, the iPhone 5S has been chugging along on iOS 11, and although it can be slow, it does still work pretty well. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're going to be asking an interesting question. Is Apple going to kill the iPhone 5S? I'm asking this due to the uncertainty around whether or not the 5S will get iOS 12, and what it means if it does or doesn't. Yes, I've already done a video asking if it'll get iOS 12 at all, but in this video we're more focused on if Apple's going to kill the 5S like they did with the 4S, as in slow it down with updates and then leave it in a slow state forever. With the iPhone 4S, Apple gave it another year of support with iOS 9 despite their update patterns for the time. This turned out to be a terrible move on their part, crippling the already slow iPhone 4S, and in my opinion, killing it completely. It was basically unusable on iOS 9. So the question of whether or not Apple will kill the 5S doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with the iOS 12 update. Apple may not be killing the 5S by leaving it on iOS 11 despite what you might assume. Before we dive too deep into this, I will quickly mention that this is all speculation. I have no idea what Apple's gonna do, and no one really does, so take what I say with a grain of salt. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you go follow me over on Twitter and Instagram for cool tech tidbits and other stuff. Links of course down below, and with that out of the way, let's continue. Firstly, let's talk about what the iPhone 5S is right now. It's on iOS 11. It's fully supported up to iOS 11.4. iOS 11 has been quite buggy, and it is on the iPhone 5S as well, but it's not as buggy as it was at the start of the cycle. With 11.3 and 11.4, Apple is really improving on things, which is good. We've needed this for a while, and the fact that they've been releasing updates so quickly is a sign that they're trying to improve. So while iOS 11 isn't great, it's not terrible either. Definitely not as bad as it was at release. Being on iOS 11, the iPhone 5S can run almost any app right now, with the exception of some big games like Fortnite or whatever. For the most part, it's fully supported, and it doesn't feel obsolete yet. You know, it's not the fastest thing in the world, but it's definitely still usable. And for 2018, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's decent. It does the job. And while I wouldn't recommend necessarily going out and buying one, if you have one already, it's gonna last you fine for the rest of the year and probably next year as well, depending on what you do with your phone. So this brings up an interesting dilemma for Apple. They could A, leave it on iOS 11, which despite some issues isn't too bad, or B, update it to iOS 12. The problem with updating the 5S to iOS 12 is the possibility of major slowdown, like we saw with the 4S. An extra year of support is great, but if it comes at the cost of making the phone unusable, then it isn't worth it. Part of the reason the iPhone 5, in my opinion, is the best iPhone to date is because of how well it ran throughout its life cycle. It's still quite fast, even on iOS 10. I want this to happen with the 5S, and so if that means not getting iOS 12, then that's worth it. Now, there are some more factors to consider. The 5S and iPhone 6 are very close to the same when it comes to processing power, and so it would make sense if the 6 gets the update, which it will, that the 5S does as well. However, because the iPhone 6 was released a year later, in theory, it needs to be supported a year more than the 5S. So what am I saying here? Well, like the 5S, the 6 isn't perfect on iOS 11. It's chugging along, but it's starting to feel slow. By updating it to iOS 12, it's probably going to be even slower. And if the 5S updates as well, then that means it needs to get iOS 13, as in the 6 needs to update to iOS 13. So even if the 5S performs okay on iOS 12, it could indirectly result in the iPhone 6 being killed because it wouldn't be able to run iOS 13 properly, but Apple would have no choice but to update it anyway. So if I was working at Apple, what would I do? Well, it's rumored that iOS 12 is going to be more of a performance and security update. If that's the case, I would run extensive testing on the iPhone 5S to see if it suffers performance-wise. If it doesn't, then I would allow it to update, giving everyone an extra year even if it breaks basic patterns. Again, iOS 11 isn't terrible anymore, but it's still not great, and it'd be nice if we could end the 5S on a sweeter note. However, if there is a noticeable performance drop, then I would leave the 5S with iOS 11. I think that in this way, we could allow it to die off naturally. What do I mean by die off naturally? Well, slowly people will move on to better phones. No one's going to be too mad if the 5S doesn't get iOS 12. Yeah, there'll be people here and there saying, what, you know, I really wanted the next version, but the thing about that is that it's not coming out of nowhere if Apple doesn't update it. They've established these patterns, and so they aren't really hurting anybody. Yes, you might not like it if you don't get iOS 12, but at the same time, you can't really fault Apple for not giving it to you. I mean, the phone was supported for 5 years. That's pretty crazy. And of course, again, they could support it with iOS 12. But what I'm saying here is that after a phone becomes unsupported, people will slowly move on to better phones. So for example, with the iPhone 5, you still have people on it because it's supported up to iOS 10, but next year and the year after, as more and more apps move to to newer versions of iOS, less and less people will be on the iPhone 5 and 5C. However, with the iPhone 4S situation, what happened is you had a lot of people jump from it very quickly, even though it got iOS 9, because of how slow it became. It was pretty brutal. If you've ever used one, it's hard. It's not really a fun time. On iOS 8, it was, already slow, and it was okay, but definitely slower than it probably could have been. And with iOS 9, it was just brutal. What I'm saying here is that it's much better to slowly have a phone die than to kill it and have people be forced to move on, like with what happened with the 4S. In conclusion, although it's kind of feeling like I'm repeating myself here, I don't want Apple to kill the iPhone 5S. Will they? I don't know. I really hope not. And if they just blindly update it to iOS 12, it could very well happen. So I guess I'm saying that if Apple doesn't decide to give it the update, then that'll be certainly fine with me, and it'll hopefully more or less continue the trend they started with the iPhone 5 and 5C, with phones ending on good updates. But I do want to hear what you guys think. Do you think the 5S should get the iOS 12 update? And if it does, do you think that it'll kill it performance-wise? Obviously, we aren't going to know until we see it, but do you think that it's worth that risk to get iOS 12? I'm curious to see what you all say here. Sorry for the kind of shorter video, but I had a couple people ask me to do a video on how Apple killed the 5S, and while I wouldn't say that they've killed the 5S, or at least have killed it yet, I liked the general idea of the question. I hope you found this video interesting, and if so, make sure you hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter, because that'd be pretty cool of you. Links down below. And with that all being said, I'm Josh from 91Tech, and I will see you all next time.